Okay, can I welcome everybody to this webinar? We've now got 129 on board, so thank you to everybody for joining. So we'll push on. We've started a little bit late. So we've entitled this Safeguarding Young Drivers, a New Definition. So my name is Philip Seccombe. I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner for Warwickshire, and I'm going to hand over now to Joy, and then I'll come back again in a minute or two.
Thanks, Philip. Hi, everyone. I'm Joy Allen. I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner for Durham and Darlington. As Philip said, today's webinar is all about protecting young drivers. And today we'll once again be making the case for introducing a stronger licensing system in the UK that offers better protection for young and novice drivers. Philip?
Okay, so thank you, Joy. So we're doing a double act here. We're joint leads at the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. That's why we're being perfectly fair in sharing this this webinar. So just to let you know, the webinar is going to be recorded. So if you have a question or a comment, please put it into the webinar chat box, and that will be monitored during the course of this, and we'll pick them up as we go along. So what we need to do is to move away from a narrative of restriction, of one of safeguarding, skills building, and public benefit. We also need to highlight the costs of doing nothing and the importance of acting now to reduce collisions involving young drivers.
Today's event will also include the opportunity to hear some very compelling evidence from Ontario as we live link with the team from Young Drivers of Canada. It's all about showing the scale and the cross-sector support and the readiness of professionals, families and organisations to work with government for practical solutions.
Thank you, Joy. So I think now let's try and meet some of today's contributors. And I'm going to go first to Ian Greenwood, then Rebecca Morris, then Terry Cook, and then Dr. Rob Torrock. So if you could do a sort of 30 to 40-second introduction about you. So first to Dr. Greenwood.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you for the invite today. I come with three hats, I guess. My career before I retired was in the NHS as a children's trauma and intensive care nurse, and then I went on to run hospitals and national programs. Secondly, I now am a commentator and a campaigner to stop road death and reduce road danger, and I'm an expert in road safety policy following my PhD. But my most important hat is that I'm the dad to my two daughters, Alice and Clara. And because Alice was killed by a young driver at the age of 12, I now campaign and I focus on policy for children, young drivers and rural roads, which I believe are a neglected area with government.
Thank you, Ian, and thanks for joining us. I don't think Rebecca's with us, unless she pops up. Nothing heard. So I'm going to move on to Terry Cook, please.
Yeah, of course. I am a driving instructor. I co-own Support Driving School. I also run a couple of podcasts around this sector, the Driving Test podcast and the Instructor podcast, of which I've been privileged to have some of the people that are on today that have come on board with that. And I run a program called Driving Instructors 2 Vision Zero, aiming to bridge that gap between driving instructors and the road safety sector.
Thank you very much. Nice and brief. Dr. Rob Torrock.
Yep, good afternoon. Thank you for the invite to come. So I've been a consultant in emergency medicine at Dorset County for just about 20 years and a HEMS doctor with Dorset and Somerset Air Ambulance for 13 years. Just really got interested in road safety and why more isn't being done to prevent these injuries, because prevention's so much better than cure. And graduated driver licensing is a really good avenue in to change the culture and attitude for the benefit of all.
Okay, and then thank you, Rob, and then Tom Stenson.
Hi, thank you. So my name's Tom Stenson. I'm Head of Training and Deputy Chair for the ADI National Joint Council, and we are a national association for driving instructors.
Brilliant, thank you. And is Rebecca with us now? So we're now going to talk in a little bit more depth to Dr. Ian Greenwood. So Ian, why do you advocate for the introduction of graduated driving licenses in the UK?
For me, it's personal. So lives can alter in an instant. And the night that my daughter Alice was killed, her body was crushed by the young driver at collision. Her mum and her sister ended up in separate intensive care units. Our lives changed forever. The sudden horrific and traumatic collisions that impacted on my family, but impact on many, many thousands of other families as well, were based on known risk factors. And we've known about those risk factors for many decades. And for my set of circumstances, it's almost like a sick game of bingo where you go through the risk factors and then you look at what the risk factors were in the crash that killed my daughter. So lives are destroyed, futures are taken away, grief is constant, and the whole created by road death never ever goes away. And I think what makes it different for me, to answer your question directly, Philip, is that for victims like myself, what's even more difficult to bear is that there are solutions available to government. And successive governments have chosen to ignore that evidence. Stronger licensing, sometimes called graduated driving licensing, which is one element, is one of those aspects that could make a real big difference. Stronger and risk-based licensing is something we ought to be doing in Britain. Northern Ireland are going to have it. The mainland UK, the government are not considering, quote unquote, doing that. That's why I campaign. That's why I think that's important. It's to help young drivers stay safe, gain experience, and not end up with their lives being destroyed as well, either by the driver of the car that killed Alice was also killed. So it's to avoid all of those tragedies and just to help them gain experience and be excited about their future.
Thank you. And the word I pick up from your response is avoidable. A lot of these are avoidable, and it's tragic how it affects families, both close and wider families. I do understand that. So going back to GDL, Ian, do you think what specific elements do you think would be most effective in reducing road deaths among young drivers?
So there's the way I understand it, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a behavioural psychologist, but the way I understand it, I've done years of research and reading on this. The way I understand it is there are a series of interventions, all of which have an impact on the young driver. Some of which are about skills acquisition, about experience, about being better drivers, some of which very directly reduce the chance of being killed or seriously injured. So there's essentially a hierarchy of interventions that make a difference. Governments historically have chosen to go down the route of those interventions which are politically acceptable. So let's tweak the testing, let's introduce other different factors. We had hazard training many decades ago, much more politically acceptable. The two that are often focused on are the ones that government call restrictions, whereby we know that at night time and we know when there are peer age passengers in the car. There's two risk factors are the two major ones that impact on death and injury. So the logic tells you then, if you introduce those two specifics along with a package of other licensing improvements to make it all stronger, you can actually reduce death and injury as well as supporting young drivers gain experience. And also, as an added bonus in all of this, there is evidence that insurance premiums come down.
Yeah. And that all of that is true, Ian. And obviously, we receive concerns from organisations like the DFT, Department for Transport, here in the UK, that some forms of GDL might negatively impact young people's access to education, employment, or social opportunities. Do you have a comment on that?
I think that the DFT needs to look at the evidence. So the RAC Foundation, through the Transport Research Laboratory, did a piece of work, I think it was 2021, which built on actually decades of international evidence. There's some really good work from New Zealand and Canada and America in this space. I'm sorry, Canada, I don't know, I've not seen any from Canada, which basically says that although there are some minor impediments in rural areas, particularly in Australia, which is a very large country, those can be very easily mitigated. And the overall conclusion to the RAC Foundation, which is the most recent one I've read, is that there are minimal implications. Young drivers who haven't passed their test or young people who choose not to drive still manage to live their lives. They still manage to have a social life. They still manage to go to college. So all the evidence suggests that it's not minimal. I think government don't want to do it and are using that as the latest excuse. That's one of the issues that came up in the 2021 Transport Committee. It was very clearly answered by the RSE Foundation.
I agree. And I think our job is to build that wad of evidence to present so that they have no choice but to say, yes, there's a good case for this and we need to do something about it. That is my view. So I'm now going to hand back to Joy. I think Rebecca Morris might well have joined, certainly been trying to.
Yes, I think she is. I hope she is. She's saying she is. I am.
Good.
Hi, Rebecca. Lovely to see you. So without further ado, can we bring you in, Rebecca, from Vision Zero's Communications? And the first question from me is, do you think there's a misunderstanding about what GDL actually involves?
Yeah, I think there is. I think we've seen it, and unfortunately, I think the media language, media narrative has not helped this. We ourselves, I don't think, as professionals, have maybe helped that much, because I think what we've done is we've been explaining perhaps how GDL, the things it takes away from people, potentially freedom, potentially this, restriction, banning. You know, we've heard words like that, when actually we're not talking enough about what it gives: upskilling, safeguarding. And we've talked about it as if it's this one-size-fits-all solution. And by the government saying we are not currently considering graduated driving licensing, it makes it sound as if they've rejected this one package that actually they'd rather not, they'd rather not entertain. But actually, as we all know, graduated driving licensing varies greatly across the world, and there are lots and lots of different elements to it. And you can pick those elements that you feel would be most effective on your roads and for your drivers. So I think it's unhelpful that we've kind of gone down this path of restriction, and actually we need to step back and think about all the positives and the benefits and the safeguarding and the upskilling.
Thanks, Rebecca. I know that the protecting young drivers is a real push. We have got families on here. We've got we've seen that, and I know in Durham we have a Life is Precious campaign, and you think, well, there's nothing more precious, from a young perspective, and it's about protecting young drivers because they are priceless. So I think what you're saying is that safeguarding, it's about miscommunication, recommunicating, and getting those key messages out, because once they've gone, sometimes our families learn after the event, and this is a real opportunity for us to say how we're protecting and safeguarding young people. So what do you think we can do to better inform policymakers and the public about GDL?
I think there are two ways we can do that. I think we've got a duty as stakeholders, as professionals who represent all these organisations, the emergency services. We've got researchers, academics, scientists. We've got absolutely everybody in that professional space, alongside obviously the bereaved families who are campaigning as well. We all need to come together, and we need to work together with the same consistent messages, and we all need to be talking, and we're certainly doing a lot more of that more recently. And something that is really going to help with that is a new website which is going live within the next few weeks. Certainly this month it will be live, protectyoungdrivers.com. It's hosted by PACT, and it has support from NPCC, an FCC. It has support from yourself, Joy, as Police and Crime Commissioner for Durham, and it has support from Philip in Warwickshire. It has so much support already from sort of national and local sort of stakeholders, and that is basically where we're going to see all sorts of information that relates to the protection of young drivers, the risks facing young drivers, the evidence from other countries about how graduated driving licensing has and is saving lives. So if you're an MP or a member of the media or a policymaker or any member of the public, a parent, you can go onto that website and you can see reliable, consistent information about that huge need to protect young drivers during the most vulnerable months on the road.
Thanks, Rebecca. And hopefully we'll have the link in the chat. And just looking at the amount of people that's joined us, we've got 141 and it seems to be rising. So fantastic opportunity for all of us to take away something today and to really make that change. The last question from me is, really exciting, fun, and I have looked at the website and it's just so understandable to get it out far and wide, to give that, raise awareness, and the links are absolutely fantastic. A lot of work's gone into that, so grateful for you and obviously the sponsors for doing that. But what's next for the Protect Young Drivers campaign?
I think what we will do is we will use that website now as a means to work together more closely. So we'll have a network of colleagues across the country who maybe we talk and we meet a bit more in terms of aligning all of our efforts, making sure we're just up to speed with what each other is doing and looking for ways forward to get our messaging out together. So whilst amazing work is going on across the country in certain areas, and it'd be so good to just think, right, how does that become a national story? Let's look at this from a national perspective, and that's where I would hope to come in and help tell that story and bring in all important personal experiences, but also so not only are families calling for urgent changes, but also all these professionals and experts are as well. But I just don't think you can argue with that. You're bringing all of those people together who are either experts or have sadly been through a personal experience and know only too well how devastating road crashes are. And it's just not acceptable that we are losing young people like this. And young people are obviously causing crashes, which obviously affects other people out there on the roads. So, yeah, we will be working together all the more closely going forward.
Thanks, Rebecca. And you know that from our perspective, it's there's a lot of work going on with young drivers. I think there's a lot more work needs to go on with the parents and the grandparents of young drivers, because unfortunately, I was there and it was, for me, it was quite eye-opening, and it's a tragedy of it. And if you get that education for parents and grandparents who are often paying for the licenses, who are paying for the insurance, who probably is their car, to put those messages out and link to that website, I think it's going to be absolutely fantastic for us to have that resource as well. So over to you, Philip.
So I'm now going to bring in Dr. Rob Torrock. He has, as he's told us, he has plenty of experience in emergency medicine, and we feel that gives him a very powerful perspective on the topic of young driver safety. So thank you for joining us, Rob. So how long have you been arriving and seeing horrific collisions on our roads?
Thank you, Philip, and thank you, everyone. No, far too long. I've been a doctor for 30 years and on the air ambulance for 13 years. And the tragedy is, that's just my personal experience. The people this is really affecting are the victims of collisions, and the challenge, I think, is much broader than the young driver who we're focusing on today. But I think young drivers and graduated driver licensing offers us a real way to get in and improve the culture and attitude of everyone, the public and politicians and road users, to road safety. I resonate on the previous speaker's comments about the cost and the difficulty in understanding why more hasn't been done. When I think about my own practice as a clinician, the thing that strikes me about road death is that it's an entirely man-made construct. We design and engineer and manufacture the cars. We determine the licensing and the regulation on the roads. We determine the levels of monitoring and enforcement and the laws around it. And we could completely change this. All those things are changeable. So it's kind of frustrating that the outcome of our decisions has led to this harm, but the opportunity is there to change that around and to save people into the future. If you look at the costs of road deaths, It's easy looking at the annual figures to sort of get a small insight into it. But if you collect the last 10 years of deaths and serious injuries, just as an example, that's 17,000 deaths on the roads in the last 10 years and 290,000 serious injuries. And it's, 43 billion pounds to the economy each year. So it's an absolutely massive thing. And for me, the moral arguments that we should be protecting our younger drivers is probably the largest and most dominant sort of argument in my head. Add to that the political and the parents and this gap in understanding for the public and road users who haven't yet been influenced by the tragedy. We need to avoid them having to experience that before they get it.
Absolutely agree with everything you've said there, Rob. This is why we're here. We're all here together to do something about that. So you've obviously had a long career in medicine. Do you think anything's improved in our sphere of road safety over the last 30 years?
Yes, absolutely. There's been significant improvements and advances, both in technology, in my field, the medical kit we have available, the ability to go to the roadside and start intensive care at the roadside has had a massive impact. The development of trauma centres and trauma care over the last 10 years has really seen advances. We carry blood and kit that we can ventilate patients by the side of the roads now that wasn't possible 20 years ago technologically. I think more importantly than that is it feels like we're on a pivot point. We're sort of on a balance point of the politicians really getting it and someone being bold and making the changes in legislation that need to happen. We almost saw the launch of the Road Safety Investigation Branch a couple of years ago, and it's still sort of bubbling around in the background. GDL has been discussed and reviewed, and there have been publications about it since at least 2014, if not before. And again, we're kind of on a bubble. We just need to get it over that line and start saving these lives. And I think starting the GDL is a really good starting point, in as much as if we can. There's evidence that young drivers are much more high risk than other road users. They're overrepresented in the deaths and serious injuries by times 4, times 5, the number compared to other ages of drivers. And if you get them early, then they're going to continue that improvement throughout their driving career and be part of the cultural and attitudinal change that we need to see into the future. So I think it's quite exciting, but we just need to actually realise it now.
The more coroner's reports I receive following fatal and serious collisions, the more coroners are beginning to back something being done about it. And that is good news. And that will form part of our evidence, plainly, to present to the decision makers to try and get some legislative changes. So,
yeah, I think that's quite exciting, and I think PAPS did quite a lot of work around that as well, didn't they? The other opportunity I think really is ripe at the moment is using information technology. The public in their personal lives accept an intrusion of data and data sharing and sharing the personal data for convenience and leisure benefits. Why aren't we mandating that all vehicles have to have data trackers that are logging what's going on and are openly available to police and authorities in the event of a collision, so that we've got the evidence to show what's happening and understand it far better than the current situation of the collision investigators that do a wonderful, amazing job, but there could be so much more refined data of it.
And of course, it works pretty well in the aviation industry, but the number of fatalities and serious injuries are much more on our roads. So there is absolutely an argument to do that. And I can't agree with you more. So finally to you at this stage, Rob, on your experience treating young crash and collision victims, what do you see as the most urgent gaps in our current approach to young driver safety?
I think I pointed at two things. One is the moral duty we as a society have to preserve life and protect people from themselves and from each other. We know that young drivers are high risk, so why aren't we focusing more monitoring and requirement for training and graduated experience on them and preventing them from carrying 3 or 4 peers who we know quadruple the risk of them being involved in a collision? Then those individuals are also affected. So there's that. The biggest gap, I think, is in the public and the politicians' awareness and understanding of the realities and the brutality out there. And we need them to get that without having to experience it themselves.
Brilliant. Okay, so back to you, Joy. I don't know whether you can turn your camera on. I can see you, but if not, it could be a technicality. Back to you.
Can you see me, Philip?
No,
Sorry.
no, we can't. No.
Oh, right. Okay. Sorry about that. I can see me. We'll have a go at the next session. So it's time now for our summary. First summary of the questions and comments you've put in the webinar chat function, and we've got Tom Stenson, who's head of training at the ADI National Joint Council, is going to give us a nice summary. Good to see so much commentary going on in the chat. So over to you, Tom.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joy. I'd like to summarise with a couple of comments that have come up here about education and the importance of educating young people. And I think this is where the role of driving instructors really can begin to step in, because we're managing to reach those young people at a very important stage. And if we can perhaps work more with parents and guardians on how they can coach their sons and daughters and maybe implement their own style of GDL to help kind of reduce some of those collisions. But it just highlights that point of how important it is for all of us to play the part that we do. There is one question here, or a comment for Rebecca Morris, and this is about the website. And Sarah's asked, will stakeholders receive a notification when the website's up and running? And will there be any resources available on there?
Firstly, yes, 100%. And that will be going out to as many local and national stakeholders, Safer Roads partnerships, police forces, police and crime commissioners locally, and as many people as we can possibly reach over the next few weeks. So you can see the website before we do a wider public launch. So it will be live, but it won't be publicised fully until probably just after sort of September time, when we will have an event to launch it. So yes, we will definitely make sure you all as stakeholders, certainly attendees to this meeting, I'll ask James from Project Edward to send out all the details so everybody can see the website, and hopefully will be willing to put their logos forward for our supporters page. So anybody going on there can say, wow, look at how many people support the greater need to protect young drivers and reduce young driver crashes.
And I think that's highlighted in the comments we've got here. There seems to be lots of support for that.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. And we'll come back to you, Tom, a bit later as well. Thank you, Rebecca, for that excellent response to that question. So we're now going to go international. So I'm very pleased to extend a very warm welcome to colleagues from Young Drivers of Canada. They will set out their own journey in the graduated driver licensing. And here to talk to them is driving instructor and podcaster Terry Cook. Over to you, Terry.
Thanks, Philip. We'll give you and Joy a rest for a minute because I've got the three guests from Canada, as you mentioned, and we'll let them take a moment to introduce themselves. So do you want to introduce yourselves, Andrew, Brian, and Bapreet?
Yes, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon in the where you're located. My name is Andrew Merrick, and I'm the Chief Growth Officer. Sorry, I'm getting some feedback here. I'm the Chief Growth Officer and Chief AI Officer at Young Drivers of Canada. Young Drivers of Canada is Canada's leading provider of driver education, dedicated to teaching Canadians safe, responsible, and confident driving since 1970, with over 1.4 million graduates. We are Canada's largest driving training organization, and we are coast to coast. I'd like to introduce Brian Hart. Brian Hart is the Chief Training Manager at and with Young Drivers of Canada for more than 18 years. He started as an instructor, now oversees the training and certification of instructors nationwide, ensuring the highest standards of safety, professionalism, and effectiveness. And I would also like to introduce Bapreet. Bapreet Kaur is not only a YD student, but she is a member of YD's AI team that recently released an iOS app that is an AI-enhanced driver's coach. This app is aimed at new drivers as a robust next-generation tool to encourage driving practice in support of YD's skill-based approach to driver training.
Excellent. Well, I am keen to talk to Bapreet, but I'm going to come to you first, Andrew and Brian, because I want to ask you Which key features of the Ontario graduated driving licensing system have proven most effective in reducing those crash rates amongst young drivers? And what evidence can you share about their impact on road safety since its introduction?
If I may, I think one of the biggest things is providing the amount of training necessary to become a defensive driver. Give you my own instance. When I first got my beginner's license at 16 or 17, it's a while ago, but I can't remember. And I wrote a simple test, which really hasn't changed much to this day. And at that point, within a few weeks, if my driving instructor that I had at the time thought that I was able to maneuver the vehicle and train and was eligible to go and take the road test in a very short period of time. However, that doesn't mean that I learned to deal with what was on the roads. Unfortunately, I had to do that on my own, and I paid for some of those mistakes without having the experience from a licensed professional and a good amount of time to do it. So I don't think that we can build those habits within a very short time frame. I think in a lot of cases, what we're really doing is just building on the mechanics of operating the vehicle, obeying the rules of the road, and not looking at the general environment, which, it's quite pleasurable to drive, but it can also be very dangerous too. In some of the cases, the restrictions that were put into place here, our graduated licensing program went in on April 1st, 1994. And it was an idea to reduce collisions, especially with novice drivers out there, and provide better quality of driving out there. In the immediate post-year of that, what was noticed was there was a decrease of about 31% in 1995 compared with the prior cohort of 1993. So a significant reduction in there. Fatal injury collisions in that same time frame were reduced by 24%. And fatal crashes for 16-year-olds, where we start, reduced by 73% compared to those that didn't participate in a graduated program. So it did provide significant reductions even within the first year, and really that's just 1 year of implementation and running it. Some of the restrictions that were put into place was the idea of a curfew, if you will, limiting a novice driver's ability to drive between the hours of midnight and 5 a.m. Night driving, as we all know, brings certain hazards and things that they're not aware of. So even with a co-driver, they're not allowed to drive at that point in time. The other thing, they were not allowed to practice on freeways. So a freeway or a motorway, in your case, they had to be with a licensed driving professional to be able to do that. And it's important that we get them out as much as we can. In my case, when I received my full license, it was like, here you go drive on a freeway. And it's like, what the heck am I even up against here? I have no idea. So that was one thing. Also, the restriction that was put into place is zero blood alcohol content. So they're not allowed to. And if in the Ontario, if you're in a graduated program, you can't have any alcohol at no matter what stage. And even once you reach the full license and have passed all the final tests, it's still a restriction up to the age of 22. So 21 and under, we don't allow those types of things. So there was a lot of different things that have provided this. And I think part and parcel is at Young Drivers, what we do is we really strive to put a proper defensive driving package in, not just the mechanics of operating a vehicle. There's more to it than that. Okay. And you really need a good defensive program out there, one that looks at not only the mechanics and the rules of the road, Those are easy enough to do, as Terry, as I'm sure you understand, right? It's like, what do you do when a situation happens, when something goes wrong? What should I be looking for? How can I anticipate something? So that's something at Young Drivers that we have really tried to work on.
I'm just going to rudely interrupt you there, Terry. We need to sort of push on a bit. We can't overrun by very much. So back to you.
No problem. I was just going to touch on that point there about the defensive driving aspect, because I want to know how your focus on defensive driving and real-world hazard recognition, how that differs from the traditional test prep that might come about.
Yes, a lot of driving schools, even in Ontario here, use the typical test prep, right? So it's basically, can we make turns at lights in a residential area? Are we making the stops? Am I able to do a parallel park, a three-point turn? Those types of things. And that's not what we focus on. We have a comprehensive program of 4 different habits that we use, things like looking well ahead, keep space, move your eyes and spot the problems, and then a number of sub-habits that contribute to those. And those things are really meant to keep you safe on the road. Our thought is that if we can teach you to drive defensively, then a road test is really not much of an issue. So we focus more on what you should be aware of, what you should be looking for, what can you do in given situations, rather than just pass the test.
I want to take a minute to bring Bapreet in, because I'm interested in Bapreet's experience, in particular, sort of what aspects of that graduated driving licensing process sort of made you feel most prepared for independent driving. So I don't know if you can hear that, Bapreet. Want to chip in?
Thank you, Terry. So when I first started, I was honestly very nervous about driving, especially being on those busy roads and handling real life situations. But with the practice, guidance, and time, I became much more comfortable, and now I feel confident driving independently. The whole experience of graduated licensing and learning with the young drivers taught me not just how to drive, but how to drive safely and responsibly. Personally, one of the biggest things that made me feel prepared for independent driving was the step-by-step structure of the graduated licensing system, starting with the written test, which we call here as G1 license, gave me time to focus on understanding the rules of the road before even getting behind the wheel. Then having to wait and gain experience before even doing the road test, which we call here as G2 road test, allowed me to build confidence gradually. The in-car lessons to young drivers of Canada were really helpful. The instructor especially focused on defensive driving, hazard perception, and how to stay calm under pressure, which are, I think, the real-life skills that just go beyond just passing a test. It helped me overcome a lot of initial anxiety, especially around driving in traffic and navigating unfamiliar roads. It was reassuring to know that I didn't need to be perfect right away. I just needed to improve with each stage.
Excellent. I love that. I think one of the things we hear a lot is you learn to drive once you pass your test. So if that is the thing that people are going down, well, we might as well put this GDL in and help them actually learn to drive after passing the test. But I want to come with one more question. I think this is going to fit to you, Andrew, or potentially Brian, which is about the insurance companies. Because I'm curious what role do insurance incentives play in encouraging young people to complete that comprehensive driver education?
In Canada here, it's a fairly big incentive with the insurance. Driving schools here are rated by the insurance companies themselves. They know what our curriculum is at Young Drivers. They know what another school may be teaching and using for a curriculum. In some cases, the driving schools just purchase a curriculum online and then they run through it. That's not what we do. So the problem is most driving schools out there that advertise and say, we get the highest insurance discounts. Not so much. Okay. You are rated, and quite often they don't. So if you have a good defensive driving program, with respect to us at Young Drivers here, we can actually obtain up to, depending on the insurance company, of course, a reduction in that rate of about 25% on the cost of insurance. That's pretty significant when it comes to the novice drivers having to pay for it as well. It's also in evidence too, if you look at, say, us as driving instructors, we have to carry insurance as well. And part of it, because our insurance company knows what we do, what we train, and all the rest of it, my rate is probably 1/3 of what another driving instructor may pay out there, right? So it is backed by statistics in this. But there again, you have to have a good driving training program to do that. At Young Drivers, we recertify all of our instructors yearly to make sure that we are providing the best.
So, well, hopefully we can bring something like that over in the UK, but I think we need to move on from there because time's running away from us. So let's take a minute to bring Philip back in. So thank you guys for that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Terry and Brian and Barpreet and Andrew. It is fascinating what's going on in Canada, and we're here to learn, as you've probably gathered. Is there any? I've got a couple of things on insurance, probably to you, Brian or Andrew. Is there any sort of incentive for telematics black boxes in cars of younger drivers? And would that have a beneficial effect on insurance premiums by bringing them down? And also, there's another thing we have in this country, I don't know whether you have in Canada, which we call fronting, which is when parents put a young one on their own driving license and then supposed to be driving only the parents' car, then they get off and have their own car. And in effect, they're driving their own car on someone else's insurance. Do either of those things happen in Canada?
Yes.
Handle the aspect of telematics. So with regard to the telematics, that's been in Canada for a period of time, but there's been a public, how should I say, backpedal as against it, from the standpoint that they've been looking at it as being more intrusive, and with regard to insurance companies being able to essentially also take the position that they may not, be able to take that information and utilize it in other fashions than just perhaps looking from the standpoint of giving a benefit. That being said, telematics is something that definitely is there. And our expectation, especially with the Young Drivers of Canada student body, the expectation is that we're going to be able to utilize that information and, again, go to the insurers, go to the government and say, we actually can prove the fact that with regard to our curriculum and the curriculum with regard to integration with GLP is actually materially different than someone actually getting their license simply off and going off on the roads. Brian, if you can speak to the other part of the question.
The other part of the question, as far as fronting concerned, yes, we do a lot of that there. When students first get their license, they would go on their parents' insurance as what we would call an occasional driver. Yeah. And therefore that would theoretically reduce the insurance rate for the novice starting out. When they first start driving at, Barpreet was talking about at the G1 level, the very first level, technically they don't have to have insurance here. They're considered to be, it's like you're borrowing my car. So I have allowed you to do that, and therefore you're covered under my insurance. But once they get to the second stage, now they can drive on their own. That's where they would join their parents' insurance and get a reduction in those cases. There are some restrictions on that. It really depends on the number of drivers in the household and the number of vehicles available. So, for instance, if there's only one vehicle and 4 drivers, they'll reduce the rate. However, if there are 4 drivers and 4 vehicles, according to the insurance company, a novice driver would have a vehicle available to them at all times. So their rate would not be reduced as much.
I think it's a sort of secondary conversation with the insurance companies, but it's an interesting avenue to explore, in my view. So, Joy, have you got anything you want to add? We're kind of running a bit behind time.
Yeah, I'm just conscious of time, and I think it's probably best we move on and just encourage people to keep posting in the chat any comments and any observations. But it's really fascinating to see how, across the world, everybody's got that passion for reducing deaths and injury on the roads, especially for young drivers. And there's so much we can learn from each other and take forward. So I think it's over to you, Philip, just to bring in if there's any summaries, and then we can move on.
Okay, so Tom, back to you. Any further collective thoughts on our chat?
Yeah, there's some really good comments in the chat box here relating to what Brian and Baprita said about sort of teaching for test and how driving instructors may focus on that. But I would like to just quickly finish with the comment that Carl made, because I think this is really good and it shows that everybody's doing their part. And this is that Carl and his son has come up with an idea for a motoring magazine directed at children aged 8 to 14 called Roadster. And it's designed to introduce motoring concepts, driving theory, road safety, and highway code. And they're currently on 8 issues. So well done, Carl.
That sounds a really good project. Excellent. So, James, we're going to ask you to play us a video in a couple of seconds to demonstrate the breadth of support for change. So there are 8 contributors, they're all highly influential. So we simply put them in alphabetical order. So over to you, James.
I've been researching young drivers for over 20 years now. We know that young drivers are overrepresented in crash statistics. And we also know that the introduction of graduated driver licensing reduces these crashes. Research tells us that depending on what is included in the specific scheme, whether it's a minimum number of supervised hours of driving practice while on a learner license, peer passenger restrictions, or limits on nighttime driving once the young person obtains their driver's license, can reduce these crashes by between 20 and 40%. I consider the introduction of an evidence-based graduated driver licensing system to be a key countermeasure designed to save lives.
When it comes to graduated driver licensing, the evidence is clear. It plays a vital role in protecting young drivers, passengers, and the wider public. It is, however, not a silver bullet, but it strengthens the whole safe system, supporting education, enforcement, and parents and guardians. Where GDL laws are weak, young people and their families face greater risk. GDL provides an opportunity for a safer start, and government has a responsibility to act.
I support the introduction of GDL because it's the only evidence-based intervention we have that we know works everywhere it's been implemented, and it's by far the best way of designing the licensing system, understanding how people actually learn how to drive. It's an important way of protecting young people when they embark on their driving journey, and it's one that we know that works right now.
I've been advocating for the introduction of GDL for over 17 years. The evidence shows quite clearly that GDL reduces crashes, casualties, and fatalities associated with young driver crashes. That burden is felt by all road users, not just the young drivers themselves. And by reducing the burden of these crashes, then we'll reduce the overall burden on the NHS.
At the AA and the AA Charitable Trust, we advocate the system of graduated driving licenses, whereby you save people's lives by limiting the number of peer-age passengers for the first 6 months.
In 2023, over 260 young people lost their lives on the road of the UK. So I support increased training and testing. I support restrictions on passengers, restrictions on nighttime driving, more public awareness and education so that people really understand that any measures introduced is about saving lives, young lives of both the driver and the passengers. We've seen evidence from other countries that show it does reduce accidents, it does save lives, young lives, it does make roads safer for everyone. It does start to address that inequality between rural and urban road risk, and quite simply, it protects young and novice drivers.
Fire and rescue services attend thousands of road traffic collisions each year and promote road safety in their communities. Young drivers are among the most vulnerable road users, partly due to inexperience and an increased susceptibility to peer pressure. Road casualty data shows young drivers face the highest risk when carrying passengers, particularly at night. Action to address these risks is essential, including legislation similar to the UK's tiered licences system for new motorcyclists. Tackling deaths and injuries among young drivers requires bold action.
Too many young people are dying on our roads due to a lack of on-road experience, distraction, peer pressures, or a combination of all of these things. I'm determined that policing and partners will do all that we can to encourage safer behaviours among young and novice drivers. We must do more to reduce these needless deaths, and as such, I'm supportive of some form of graduated or progressive driving licence. There would likely need to be some exemptions, such as travelling for work, but on the whole, I have real confidence in police officers to enforce the law in a legitimate and proportionate way. We see them do this every single day. Introducing simple but effective measures to limit distraction of any kind will allow the driver to focus on the task of driving for the first few months after passing their test. This will allow them to build up experience and confidence that in turn will make them a safer driver. We know such measures can save lives because we have seen the evidence from other countries around the world that have introduced such protections. Whether we call them graduated or progressive driving licences, in some ways it really doesn't matter. What does matter is that we do something to stop young and novice drivers from dying on the UK roads. Thank you for what you are doing every day to assist this.
And thank you for everybody who recorded those very special and powerful messages for us. Philip.
Yes, thank you. And I think it's probably appropriate at this stage to thank James Luckhurst, who's put this whole webinar together before we move into the final stages. He set up and runs Project Edward. And for those who don't know, Edward stands for Every Day Without a Road Death. It is a fantastic organisation and has been of great help to both Joy and I in not only putting this webinar together, but all sorts of other things that we've done and we're going to do in the future. So thank you, James. Right, so we are now moving towards the end. We don't have a lot of time. I hope you can just bear with us for the next few minutes just to finish off.
Yes.
We're going to start summarising some of the messages. So let's start with Dr. Ian Greenwood. Ian, what is it that the government doesn't like about GDL and how can that objection potentially be overcome?
Oh, that's a good question, Philip. We don't know because they're not telling us what they don't like. I think part of the problem, as I see it, is there are a number of policy areas from government in terms of supporting young people, lowering the voting age, seeking young people's votes. The groundswell of support from our communities isn't as loud as it could be. So things like today will help. But I think that one of the biggest problems that I see from government is that they want to do something. They've promised a road safety strategy. They've promised to focus on young driver risk. They've acknowledged that we've got a policy problem that needs fixing. And then it all went quiet. So what I would like them to do is to talk to us, just say what options are they considering. There's a suite of things that we've talked about today. Canada has shared their experience. New Zealand, Australia, America, Northern Ireland, everywhere else is doing it. Lots of places are doing it as well. And I would like to engage with government, not me personally, but I would like government to engage with us with a suite of options and let's see which will fly. We need to talk to the public about this because as we've heard today, we can save lives and we can make better drivers for life. Without engagement with government, that ain't going to happen.
Thank you, Ian. And that was said with real passion. And I hope that message gets home to everybody on this call. Joy, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ian, for that. I think it's just for Rebecca. We talk about the concept of on your session around changing the narrative, which I know obviously you support as well, Rebecca. What do you mean by that, and why do you think it's so important that we do so?
Yeah, I think we just all need to start spelling things out a bit more and just not get lost in this kind of this name graduated driving licensing. We've got to just talk about what it is that we need to do here. What graduated driving licensing, as I said before, could be any number of things. So it'd be great, like Ian said, if we could find out what it is that the government don't like, because at the moment, by saying they're not considering it, they're saying that's absolutely everything that could consist that GDL could consist of, and I can't believe that for one moment. Maybe it's just one or two things. But I think as practitioners, if we can all just be much clearer in the way that we talk and speak very positively, first and foremost, about what graduated driving licensing or a form of graduated driving licensing would give to young people. We see training in every other, extra training, extra experience as such a positive thing in any other area of life. Why are we thinking that it's a negative thing here? We've gone off on the wrong foot, on the wrong path, I think, with the media narrative, and we've all started talking our way out of this. But we should just be singing from the rooftops about what a positive thing this is to protect our children. The most important thing that should be protecting our children and making them safer drivers so we protect other people out there.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Excellent. Okay, over to me, I think, Joy. Yep, so there are one or two people now dropping off the call because we've gone beyond the 3 o'clock. They've probably got other meetings to go to. So, Rob, Torek, if I could just ask you to briefly remind us of the resources needed when a serious road traffic collision occurs, and what are the public health benefits to be gained if we can reduce that number, briefly.
Gosh, that's a challenging question.
I know.
I don't think the resources we throw at it are the whole sort of backbone of the NHS and the emergency services. Police, fire, ambulance, and then critical care going forwards. I think I'd bring that question back round to prevention is better than cure. What can we do to prevent these injuries? You can't mend someone. You can't always save people in these devastating, brutal, chaotic collisions. And what we need to do is prevent them happening in the first place. And I think the way to do that is we can all apply our influence by example. When you're out on the roads, drive by example. We focused on the young people, and no one's mentioned our own behaviours, our own driving example. Speed in particular is well recognised as the most significant risk. I had an interesting chat with a politician who said my constituents just aren't telling me road safety is on their agenda, and therefore it's not an agenda for me. How can we as the road safety community educate the public, get the public to influence ministers and say, yeah, this is important to us? I think that's where we need to sort of focus.
Well, as Ian has just demonstrated, there's no more evidence than a victim's family, and those that are prepared to come forward and assist in this campaign. I think we need to say yes, please, if they're happy to do it. Back to you, Joy.
Yeah, thanks, Philip. Andrew Marek from Young Drivers of Canada. How worthwhile has graduated driving licensing been for young people in Ontario? And are you 100% happy with your version of GDL, or is there scope for making it even more effective?
I think there's much to be taken from the Ontario GDL initiative and experience. We found 4 specific things that really have moved and have incredible impact with regard to our road safety and our drivers on the roads. One, enhanced behavioral improvements. So essentially, we see better behavior with regard to daily road activities by the drivers on a road, and this is made clear with regard to reduction, as was previously indicated, in accidents and collisions. The other is enhanced parental engagement. We found that studies in Ontario have indicated that as a byproduct of GLP, that parents have become more engaged and more supportive with regard to the kids, and it's absolutely crucial. What we have with regard to courses that are being set up, it's the parents that are involved. The kids are sort of brought in, under their wing, and it's really, you must have parental involvement to spearhead any of these initiatives. And there's economic and social benefits, healthcare savings, which have already been discussed, but also reduction in property damage. So, at a very fundamental and a political aspect, these kind of political points with regard to being able to manifest a specific benefit with regard to what GLP means to society, as well as what GLP means to the public purse, are ultimately fundamental with regard to what the Ontario experience has been. That being said, the Ontario experience, just as noted in a recent Auditor General's report, is not perfect. One of the aspects that we're being faced with regard to a challenge is the reluctance to practice. There are many requirements in the United States and in other Canadian jurisdictions that there's a minimum practice period in number of hours that someone has to self-attest before they can actually get their license. So this is something that we're looking at. We're coming up with a technological solution with regard to the app that we previously mentioned to have the aspect of encouragement and engagement with regard to the new learner with regard to ongoing practice so that they achieve, whether it's a minimum hours, some in the States can go up to as much as 90 hours prior to actually being certified to take their final license. So it's these things that GLP has been an incredible social initiative, but there's room for improvement for sure.
Tom, let's have your final assessment of the chat. Bearing in mind we are losing viewers as I speak.
Just very quickly, I'll just say that everyone seems to be unanimous in what people are saying here, and it's good to see that everyone is singing from the same hymn sheet.
I think obviously for time wise, I think this will be the first of hopefully many these conversations that we've gone on as well. So I think that's all we've got time for today. I think it'd be worth rounding up and just say thank you to everyone that's taken part. We'll circulate the details of the recording, which you're all welcome, and I really do hope that you share far and wide. Philip, just want to do the last word?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for everybody. I hope this will be the first of other webcasts. We are committed, Joe and myself, to driving this forward and working with all the partners, many of whom were on that short video we saw, which I thought was terrific. And I think this is going to be the beginning of a journey that I hope won't take too long, but it's certainly worth getting to the end of it. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining, and goodbye. And hopefully see you again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.